Hi math students. This lesson is designed to help you to learn how to use Excel to sort through bulk amounts of data. And we're going to use Excel to generate pivot charts, to have a look at some informative statistics from the categorical data we're looking at. Then any numerical data we find, we're going to review how to generate box and whisker plots and use Google Sheets to generate histograms. Okay, so we're going to be using this following Excel file. So we'll open it up very shortly. However, I just want to go through the task itself, because the other aspect of this is you being able to generate a really brief summarizing report on findings you make when you have analysed the data statistically. So moving down, let's have a look at the task. So background, on Sunday 14th of April 1912 at 11:20 p.m, the ocean liner of the Titanic ran into an iceberg, and with hours, the ship that was considered unsinkable became submerged, and around 1,600 lives were lost that night. Your task is, from the data in the Excel sheet, you're going to select a passenger from the list that's there, and it can be a name closest to your own. You can pick another name that might have some sort of meaning to you, but the point of this is to conduct an investigation on the chances of survival for that particular passenger. We're going to look at what particular statistics were at play there that you could analyse and make a decision on the chances of survival for your passenger. Part of this is you then taking the statistical findings and writing a really simple report to conclude on whether the person you chose lived or died against the odds. As part of your response in this simple report, I'd like you to put together a brief introduction telling us in your own words what was investigated and how it was done. A little description on method. Now just use brief steps or dot points telling me the techniques you'll use. You'll have an analysis section where you'll include tables, chart, where you're explaining and comparing the data, and within that giving very brief points of analysis underneath those tables and charts. The next part will be you talking about assumptions and associated effects. That means describing any assumptions you've made while doing the study and how they may affect the accuracy of your findings. And within that, tell me some strengths and limitations of your model once you've come to an answer. So what was good, what was bad about your model? And lastly, you'll write a little conclusion based on the findings. Within that, a concluding comment of your findings taking into account assumptions, strengths, and limitations. Take a moment to open up the Excel file and scroll through and have a look at the data you have. Okay, so when you open it up, you'll see as you scroll down, you have a massive list of passengers that we have to process. Now note that in the initial details of the problem, there were 1,600 passengers. So some passengers have been unaccounted for in this particular data pool. So that's something you need to think about when you're considering assumptions, strengths, and limitations. As a first step, it's really important that we identify the type of data that we're dealing with. So just to the side here, I'd like you to press pause and put in a little table where we're going to identify the type of data. So we have name, class, age, gender, and whether the passenger survived or not. So press pause, put together your table, and then go ahead and identify the type of data. So categorical, remember there's nominal or ordinal, and numerical, remember there's discrete or continuous. Okay, how did you go? Hopefully you decided that name was nominal, class was ordinal because there's an order, first, second, third. Gender is nominal, you're male or female. Survival is nominal, yes or no. The only piece of numerical data in there is age. Now with age, it's a bit of a tricky one. If age is a count of the whole year of the person, it's discrete. However, if you're given an exact measurement of age on a scale of some sort, it's continuous. And with this, you can see that we've used a continuous scale, 0.92, for someone within the age data. So we have to call it continuous in this case. Our next job is, as the task sheet asks us, we must pick a person. To help you find what you might be looking for in terms of a name that has some meaning to you, you can use this find and select feature in Excel. So if you click on it, you can pop in a name of interest. So for example, my last name is Thwaite. So I'm going to have a look if there's any of my last name in there. And there's not. So I can change that. I'm going to look for my first name, Louise. And here's one. If you don't like that name, you can look for another. There's another one. Because I can see that there are more than one, I'm going to pick a Louise that's closer to my age. So I think I'm going to stick with Miss Edith Louise Rosenbaum. Press pause, go ahead and pick a name for yourself. Once you have decided on someone, it's a good idea to actually highlight them so you don't lose where they are. So simply select all their details, go up to your fill tool and just highlight the cell. From here, we need to decide what the useful data is that we're going to be analysing. So to me, it doesn't make sense to analyse all of these names. What I'm interested in is, because I'm trying to assess the survivability of my passenger, I need to look at, out of the first, second, third class, out of the age, out of gender, who survived and who didn't, and what are the totals and percentages associated with that. From there, that means that I'm interested in using the class, age, gender, and survived columns to analyse. So we're going to create some new sheets down the bottom. To start with, I'm going to create a tab and call it data to analyze. And then I'm going to select, so if you select the columns and press copy, so Control C, go over to the new tab, and this is the data that I'm going to analyze. Now, I want to keep these raw data tabs available just in case I stuff up or delete data, so I can go back and get the original data that I've analyzed. My next step is to then go ahead and analyze the types of data. So I'm going to create a categorical and a numerical tab. So for categorical, I want class, gender, and survive. So if I want to select them, I hold down Control and select on the relevant columns. Right click, copy, and then I can paste them into categorical. For numerical, I'm interested in the age and whether they survived or not. So I'll select those two columns, copy them over, and pop them into numerical. Now it's time to sort the data. So you can see when you scroll down, the data's been sorted in terms of their class. So what you can do is leave the data selected, and because I want to clean up this gender and survived yes or no, you can use this sort tool, custom sort, and you can tell it to sort by survived, which is probably our priority because we want to know yes versus no. Then you can add levels. Okay, so I want to know, let's say gender next, and finally their class. Okay, so you can see that it's sorted by priority of no first, and see that there were 863 people who perished. If you wanted to sort by class in priority to gender, you can alter your sort by simply changing the order. And now you can see it sorts it on survived first, then class, then gender, whatever your preference is. Okay, the cool thing about Excel is that rather than going through and counting all the rows that have the particular features you're looking for, you can get Excel to do it for you using what we call pivot charts. Okay, to put in the pivot chart, I need to make sure that I'm selecting the relevant data. So select only the cells that we're interested in. We don't want to select any blank cells. So shift and then click will select all of those for you. Then go to insert, pivot chart and table. We've already selected the cells we want, and we're going to put it onto a new worksheet. So you'll notice it's done it down here. I'll quickly rename it to totals. And you'll notice that it's got a blank chart here and a blank table. So to fill that out, we're interested in counting the survived. So we'll pop that into the legend, and you'll notice this funny looking E means sum. So it's adding up the count of survived. And then we want to split up the gender and the class. You can have the classes on the bottom and split it into male, female, or I would probably prefer to have female in first, second, third class, male in first, second, third class. So you can close that, and we can see a very useful chart, a bar chart showing us the categories and counting how many belong to that category. So for example, from the data, let's look at the female passengers that were in first class. There were 9 out of a total of 1,313 passengers. If you're a male in third class, there were 441 passengers out of 1,313 that did not survive. Then you can look down the bottom and see that out of the total number of passengers, 863 didn't survive, 450 did survive. If you read across the rows, there were 462 female passengers, there were 851 male passengers. Of those female passengers, 308 survived, 154 didn't. Of the male passengers, 142 survived, 709 didn't. So you can see that pivot charts are a really useful way to sort our data for us, so we don't have to go through and manually count all those statistics. Another useful way of comparing your statistical values is to use percentages. So to do that, I want to create copies of this tab in particular. If you want to move any of the tabs, you can click on them and drag them across and place them where the black arrow says. Okay, so and if you want to create a copy, so you right click, move or copy. We want to create a copy, and you just press OK, and it'll create a second version. Drag it across to where you want it. Now I'm going to turn this one into a percentages version. So rename it totals percentage. To change the percentage that you're seeing in the table on the chart, simply go up to this field list to bring up that fields section again, And on count of survived, if you left click and go to value field settings, instead of doing a count, we can show values in terms of percentage. And because I want the percentage of these out of the grand total number of passengers, I select this option. So you can see that 1,313 passengers is 100% of the passengers. And then when I look at this table in terms of the percentages involved, I've converted my totals. So here I had 154 females that did not survive. If I come over to the totals, that accounts for 11.73% of passengers were female that did not survive. If I want to choose another one, so if I look at third class males that did not survive, there are 441 of them. That accounts for 33.59% of passengers. If I look at the number of males on the ship, 851 males were on the Titanic. That accounts for 64.81% of passengers. So you can see how I've turned totals into a percentage. Now I want to have a closer look at each of the individual categories. So I'm going to create another copy of this. Drag it across. The first thing I want to look at is the percentage of gender. Okay, so I want to get rid of class. So I just want to look at male versus female survivability. So I'll bring up the field list again, and I don't want class there anymore, so I'm going to get rid of it. So now what I can see is just looking at the percentages of male and female. So this is still in terms of the grand total of the ship. Instead of being interested in just the total number of passengers, I might want to change it to the total number of female. So to do that, I need to just simply change the percentage in terms of row total. So here you can see that out of the total 100% of females, 33.33 perished, 67% roughly survived. And of the male passengers, 83.31 didn't survive, and only close to 17% of male passengers survived. If you wanted to know out of the people who survived and didn't survive, how many were male and female, you simply change it to percentage of column total instead. So here, out of the 100% of people who didn't survive, 17.84 were female, 82.16 were male. So that might be something else you're interested in comparing. Lastly, I kind of want to compare classes. So I created another tab down the bottom by copying over and calling it class. And I went to my field list and I selected class into this access categories and got rid of the gender. So at the moment, it's still in the column total. So to interpret this, this is saying from the 100% of passengers that didn't survive. So if I look at that, that was 863 passengers. So out of the 863 passengers that didn't survive, 14.95% of the passengers were from first class, 18.66% were from second class, and 66.4% of passengers were from third class that didn't survive. If I want to change that to the row total, to interpret that, in first class, 40.06% of passengers didn't survive, whereas 59.94% of passengers did survive. In third class, 80.59% of third class passengers did not survive, as opposed to 19.41. So there's different ways you can set your tables up to talk about the data in the way that you want to talk about it. The last thing I want to do is analyze the numerical data with age and whether they survived or not. So again, I can go to my sort, custom sort, and tell it to sort by age and then whether they survived or not. One thing you need to note with the age data though is when you're going through the raw data, you would have noticed that some of the ages of the passengers were unknown. So unfortunately for our data analysis, we can't include this data to analyze. So this is clearly a limitation of the data I have to analyze, which I can talk about later. I kind of want to know though how many unknown ages there were. A simple way to do this without going through and counting them all is to get Excel to do it for you. So if you simply use the command count if and select the range you're interested in. So select all the way down to here, shift click, and then comma, and count if will look for a criteria like a word that's within that range if you just include it in double italic. So we're looking for unknown, and then you close brackets, and it will count that for you. So there are 179 passengers where we don't know their age. For the ones that we do know, we want to analyze the yes and no ages. So I'm going to create another little subtable over here. And then I'm going to reselect these and sort them in terms of survived first and age next. So now I've got the ages of everyone who didn't survive. So I can go through and select all of them, being careful not to include the unknowns. So Control C to copy. And these are the ages of the no's. We'll then do the same with the yeses. Again, being careful not to select the unknown. Control C and copy it over. I've now sorted the data in terms of the age of people on the ship who survived and who didn't, ready for analysis. Because it's numerical data, I can statistically analyze it using measures of center and spread. So I would create a table like this and then go through and calculate those statistical values. Okay, firstly we'll analyze the statistics. So I'm going to go ahead and go through. So lowest is, remember, is min. Select the first all the way down to the last age. Close brackets and press enter. Q1, remember, is quartile. Select it, comma 1 for first quartile, close brackets, press enter. It might be handy, instead of scrolling down all the time, to tell yourself the range that of cells. So that's from K2 to K423. Okay, and that way you don't have to go through and scroll down every time. So median is median, and we want K2 to K423. If you're happy to keep scrolling and selecting, that's fine. Third quartile, highest is, remember, max, mean is average, range is your highest minus your lowest, and IQR is your Q3 minus your Q1. Okay, and then go through and do it for the nose. So let's have a look at what the range is there. So the minimum, so from L2 down to L713. So I'll make a note of that. Pause the video and then go through and work out the rest of the stats for the no ages. And hopefully they're the values you got. If you're not happy with the number of decimal places, remember we can control that. So we might stick to controlling the mean to 1 decimal place, since it's the only one that's not matching the others. Okay, so if I'm looking at what this data is telling me, I can see that the lowest age of the people who survived was 0.8 of a year. I can see that the mean or average age of people who survived was 29.2 years old, so around 29 years old. I can see that the range of ages of people who survived is around 68.2 years. For the people that didn't survive, the lowest age was 1. The median age was 27.5. The average or mean age was 29.8 years old. The range was 74 years. So you've got some statistical calculations there of measure of center and spread that you can include in your analysis. Now remember that that data includes 179 passengers where we don't know their age. So when we're talking about limitations, that will be a definite limitation of our statistical analysis model we've created. Moving on to creating a box and whisker plot. So we'll select the data we're interested in. Go to Insert, Statistical Charts, Box and Whisker. And then we'll go through and do all those polishing details like putting in a chart title, adding in axes labels. So when you finish, it should look something like this. You notice that it's identified some of these ages as outliers. We know those passengers were on the ship, so it just means that the ages are a little bit above what's seen as normal on the ship. Moving on to creating a histogram. If we just simply copy that and open up Google Sheets. Okay, so if I just right click, paste, I'll call this the Titanic data age analysis, and then I can create my histograms. So we'll do the yes one first. Insert, chart. We want to change it to a histogram. So scroll down, histogram chart. If you're not happy with the range of the columns that we've got here, you can change it. So I might change it to the nearest ages. So bucket size, let's do every 5 years. Okay, and if you want to set like a limit on the max min value ages, we might go all the way up to 80, 0 to 80. Then we can customize things like the chart title, horizontal axis, age, vertical axis, frequency. Okay, and that looks pretty good. Press pause and go ahead and do it for the no data. Yours should look something like this. You notice it's the same color, so I would like it to be a different color. So I'm going to click on series and make it red. Okay, and now I've produced histograms as well that I can use for my analysis. Coming back to the task, we now have to use all of those values and charts that we've found to talk about the survival of the passenger we've selected. and the chances that they have. So for my passenger, I'll be looking at the chances of survivability of a female in first class who was 33 years old, and you'll do the same for your passenger. I know for most of you this will be your first attempt at a bit of a more in-depth statistical analysis, but have a go at producing a simple report to conclude on your findings on whether the person you chose lived or died against the odds, and compare it to the sample report that I'll put together. All right, good luck. This should take you a day or two, and I'll check in with you and go through my sample report. Thanks, students.